you might want to consider going to one college.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about social engineering. And for those of you who don't know what social engineering, it's the psychological manipulation of people into performing or divulging confidential information. And candidates for social engineering attack can range from a corporate executive to an elementary school student. And even the most seasoned IT professionals, as Jim pointed out in his earlier session, can be vulnerable to these types of attacks. And 98% of attacks rely on some form of social engineering. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and people think, well, I'm a relatively small business or I'm a small organization, so I don't need to worry about this level of risk. But that's really not valid. And in fact, over 43% of the risk is with small businesses. Because these are the most vulnerable, because they are not investing the hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars that are going into the infrastructure and protection that's being done by organizations like Facebook and Microsoft, who are still vulnerable. And so obviously, building the right protection is key. And part of that is technology, and part of that is people. Now, just to give you an idea of where the number of breach incidents come from by sort of type, we've got identity theft is the number one at 65%, account access at 17%, financial access at 13%, sort of nuisance or annoyance at 4%, and the rest falling into 1%. And if we look at where these breaches are coming from, 56% of them are coming from sort of malicious outsiders, 34% from accidental loss. Surprisingly, over 7% are coming from malicious insiders. And then we've got, small 2% of hacktivists who are, actively trying to collect information. Things like the Pandora Papers, which we saw released earlier this week as well. And then 1% falling from unknown. And the numbers of records being exposed through these breaches are massive. And, the stats I have go back to 2018. So basically up these by 900%. In social media alone, it was 2.5 billion records in 2018. And the government, it was 1.2 billion records back in 2018 as well. So you can just use your math in your head and understand the scale that we've seen recently and the number of exposure. The amount of records and data that is out there is insane. So part of what we're going to be talking to you today about is obviously tools and strategies you can use to protect your data, but also tools and strategies that you can use to protect your identity. Because if all this information is floating out there already, what are the tools and strategies you can use today, right now, to protect your information and protect your identity? So some tools and tips for social media prevention. First and foremost, educate yourself. Our first mitigation is security through education. So if people aren't educated on the types of attacks being used, then they can't possibly defend against them, right? So it's really important to do that. And the two most commonly used and effective approaches or pretexts are usually either posing as internal employees or posing as someone hired by the organization. So keep an eye out for those types of things. Also, be aware of the information that you are actually releasing. And this tip sort of encompasses both verbal communication as well as social media and Twitter. You see all those posts on social media that are asking a bunch of questions and they sort of gamify it. A lot of those are actually used by hackers to gather and collect information against you. So you really want to be aware of what information you're putting out there into the world. And of course, we've seen all these telemarketing phone calls, people claiming to be CRA or the tax authorities, and we're going to throw you in jail. And they're using that to collect and gather information and to extort you. The other thing that's really important is to determine which of your assets are the most valuable to criminals. Because even companies that actively seek to protect themselves from social engineering attacks often focus on the wrong things. A lot of companies are focusing on protecting their assets that they've used for, generating new business, and that's not necessarily the way the attacker will look at your company. They're going to look for assets that are valuable to them and assets that they can actually monetize. So information is perceived as having no value to you may actually be valuable to hackers. So you have to change your perspective on this from like, what's the information valuable for operating the business to what's the information that's valuable to a hacker. Next, we want to make sure that, as Jim said, we keep our software up to date, because hackers who are using social engineering techniques are often seeking to determine whether you're patched or unpatched, or if you have out-of-date software that they can then later use to exploit. You really want to be careful of making sure your systems are up to date. And this is a really easy solution to do that is often overlooked. And next, we want to make sure that when we're asked for information, we consider whether the person that we're talking to actually deserves the information that they're asking about. And this is where the rubber really hits the road, right? Whenever you're in a conversation with someone and you don't know, before you answer the question they ask, make sure that they actually deserve to ask the information. Now, sometimes that doesn't always work, as Jim pointed out in his earlier example. Sometimes even the security people can be fooled by that. But doing everything you can to reach out and validate that the requests for information are valid, and think through whether, does it make sense here to provide this information. And then, next we also want to, look for what type of or what questions don't sort of fit the pretext of the conversation. And the last tip sort of leads into this one. So if the person is asking questions that don't fit the persona that they're sort of representing to you, that should really ring off alarm bells to you and be a big thing that you're looking out for.